Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kristen Generator. I'm the chair of the Nutritional Ecology Working Group in TWS. And with me co-presenting this webinar today is Rachel Cook, who is one of our board members on the Nutritional Ecology Working Group. And the Nutritional Ecology Working Group is relatively new. We were established in March 2019. Currently, we have more than 90 members. A lot of us are ungulate ecologists, but we're always trying to get a little more diversity in terms of species and study subjects. So if you are interested in joining us, we'd love to have you. We have biannual meetings. So in addition to the TWS meeting that we have at TWS in the fall, we also have a spring meeting to just try and keep all of the working groups up to date on our activities. Our next meeting is in conjunction with the TWS annual meeting. It'll be November 5th from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern time. And just a little bit of an overview of the goals of the Nutritional Ecology Working Group to give some context for the rest of the webinar. Our main goal is developing and maintaining professional standards for wildlife research and management, and making sure these are applied to nutritional ecology studies for wildlife. Another one of our goals is to communicate or facilitate communication and exchange of information among members of the Wildlife Society interested in advancing nutritional ecology. We also want to advance professional stewardship of wildlife resources in the context of nutritional ecology. A big thing we want to do is enhance knowledge and technical capabilities of wildlife professionals and students relative to nutritional ecology and the application of methods for research related to nutritional ecology. And another goal that we have is increasing public awareness and appreciation of the role of nutritional ecology in wildlife management. To help meet our goals, and as a new working group, we initiated some focus group calls and discussions over the last year and a bit. And so beginning in October 2020 at our annual meeting or biannual meeting in the fall, we started polling our members specifically to understand the needs of our members in academia, those folks who work for agencies, as well as students and new professionals, to understand what their needs are and how the Nutritional Ecology Working Group can help fill any gaps or help promote advancing nutrition in each of these different contexts. So
hey, Kristen?
Yes.
It's Trisha. There's some background noise coming in, and also if you could speak a little louder, we might be able to hear you a little better.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay, well, I don't know where the background noise is coming from, but I definitely hear it once in a while.
Okay, it might be the ventilation here, so apologies. I'll yell a little louder into the mic.
Thank you.
So we had these focus groups beginning in October 2020, and then we continued those with some small group discussions into February 2021 and prepared a report on what our members shared with us. So this report is available and I can share it with anyone who's interested. We did distribute it to our membership, but the whole point of this report was to keep a record and help share broadly what we see as the challenges within the working group and more broadly within TWS. So it's also been shared with council as part of our annual report. So some of the questions raised by agency biologists that they wanted to discuss within these focus groups were things like, can we hunt animals to better condition? So can we actually improve the nutritional condition of animals on the landscape through hunting? They were also interested in whether or not we can incorporate range condition to inform whether harvest should be liberal or conservative, so for harvested populations specifically. They were interested in understanding how to incorporate nutrition into annual population monitoring, particularly given limitations to budgets and personnel. Another big interest was what are the relationships between nutrition and disease and nutrition and toxins, and how is nutrition related to susceptibility, and can we quantify this? Another big question was how can nutrition be incorporated into management plans, and trying to get a better grasp of which agencies have done that in a meaningful way. And then once you know you have an issue with nutrition, how do you manage for it, particularly outside of state-owned lands? Because a lot of agencies charged with wildlife management are not actually the same agencies doing the land management. So there's big interest in how to initiate collaborations with federal land management agencies like the Forest Service and BLM to better integrate research and habitat management from the state agencies. So some of the big challenges identified by agency biologists were reactive management, and that we're not actually monitoring populations or nutrition across time. So we don't know what's causing a problem. We're just reacting to it once we see it. So we don't have any of that context to help inform how we got to where we are. There also was a perceived lack of tools and training. So folks who maybe haven't been exposed to a variety of methods that would be useful to implementing in their jobs and trying to manage nutrition of populations or nutritional resources, how to measure it, and how to improve conditions on the ground to produce meaningful change. There also was a challenge of the data needed to really monitor populations can be complex. It can be difficult to collect because you need a lot of it across space and time. You might need recapture data. So these can all be challenges for agency biologists. And then another big challenge was not knowing where to incorporate nutrition into management. So is that something you should do up front? Is it something that you do kind of in the middle, at the end? How do you do it? And what? So from those concerns and challenges and questions faced by wildlife staff and agencies, we learned that there was an interest in holding additional discussions, particularly in the virtual environment through focused topic calls. So identifying calls that, or topics for phone calls, conference calls with staff that are issues across state agencies, and coming up with collective solutions through discussion across agency counterparts. Another key action item was having the working group develop a framework for incorporating nutritional condition into annual setting of tag quotas. Also developing materials for agency biologists to keep them fresh and up to date on how to incorporate nutrition and nutritional ecology into wildlife management. So making sure they have training opportunities, for example. And then identifying important management related topics to address in management planning. From our discussions with academics, two big challenges were identified, and these were a general lack of training opportunities and resources for students to gain competencies in nutritional ecology. And this is something that Rachel specifically will be coming back to later in the webinar. And the other big challenge was how to address the general lack of opportunity within the existing framework of most colleges and universities. We haven't done a formal survey of membership or universities, but from the folks who have participated in these discussions, it's clear that nutritional ecology is lacking from the curriculum of most wildlife programs, except perhaps from a lecture or two here or there, or a lab assignment. So there's not really a lot of exposure for students to these sorts of topics in their ES education. So some of the key action items to support academics were to formalize an education committee within the working group to help address some of these educational needs, to identify and develop skilled workshops. So what sort of topics, and then who's going to give them and where. Another way to support the academic challenges is to develop training modules and tools. So things that can either be incorporated into our current course curriculum, maybe an add-on for a lab or a lecture or something of that nature. And then also to advocate for nutritional ecology courses in the Certified Wildlife Biologist application through TWS to help increase the importance of this from the professional perspective within TWS. For our students and new professionals, some of the big challenges they identified were a lack of education and training opportunities. So this is something we're basically seeing consistently across these groups, from agency wildlife biologists to academics and students and new professionals. Also, something that they've observed is a lack of expertise among university faculty in specific methods. And, this also can be a little bit broader in that some students felt that they just didn't have the opportunities to collaborate with people who could maybe help round out their committees if their current faculty advisor either didn't have a relationship with that person, didn't know that person, etc. So trying to figure out ways to provide more support is something that we're really interested for students and professions. And then students also identified a need for and a desire for broader exposure to training and education opportunities in nutritional ecology. So some of our key action items for students and new professionals are to develop a student and new professional committee to help integrate our other committees developing training materials so that they're not only identifying what maybe the academics and agency biologists think is important, but also what students are seeing as they're kind of coming up and building the next generation of nutritional ecologists. We're also evaluating the feasibility of options for developing a Q&A forum. So somewhere where students and professionals can connect and share ideas, questions, etc., to try and get answers to their questions and get maybe help and mentoring that they need, and kind of some workarounds for some of those other challenges we've identified. Another thing that the students and new professionals have identified is increasing the presence of the working group on social media, perhaps adding a presence through Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or those sorts of avenues. And that's something I think we'll wait for the next board to tackle. So if you'd like more information on the working group itself or the report or anything that we're working on, or if you'd like to get involved or have ideas you'd like to share, you can contact us through our Gmail account, and you can find a lot of this information archived on our TWS website. And so I will hand it over to Rachel Cook now to talk about a skills workshop that she was kind of the lead, at least in cat herding, on to get a bunch of great nutritional ecologists who all belong to the working group to put together and host earlier this summer. So I will stop sharing and hand it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Kristen. Let me get my screen in. Okay, as Kristen mentioned several times, one of the reasons the Nutritional Ecology Working Group was formed was the lack of educational resources available for students and biologists who want to incorporate a nutritional element into the research or even into management plans. And as she also mentioned, very few university wildlife programs have classes which incorporate a nutritional component, and even less have a course devoted to nutrition. And so what this essentially means is that most biologists, and this includes students, agency biologists, and professors, lack even the most fundamental knowledge about nutrition, why it's important, and how to even measure it. So today I'm going to talk just a little bit, give you an overview of our first skills workshop that we decided to put on, and that was measuring forage quantity and quality for herbivores. And I want us just to spend a couple minutes of explaining a little bit in more detail why there is a need. So, you know, the foundation of nutritional ecology is food, and at face value, measuring forage quality and quantity can seem quite simple. You can go out and you can clip vegetation, pop it in a bag, weigh it, send it to a lab. But for herbivores who make 1 million decisions a day on what to eat from a collection of plants that vary in their digestibility, which in turn depends on what type of digestive system the animal has, it can vary in nutrient content, vary in handling time, physical and chemical defenses, etc. Food is far more complex to define, let alone measure in a way that's relevant to the animal. So from a graduate student's perspective, then we've been told numerous times that there's a big need for a resource like this particular skills workshop. But I also wanted to touch on the perspective of some of us who've been working in the nutritional ecology field for decades and what we kind of see over and over again. We see presentations at conferences, we read publications, et cetera, where it's obvious something is pretty wrong with particularly forage quality data. And for example, students who ruin all their hard work by preserving their samples the wrong way or at the wrong temperature, or the wrong lab assay is chosen relative to the herbivore of interest. There are inconsistencies across labs for assays that are used for a variety of applications, and these inconsistencies can impact data and interpretation. We see analyses focused on metrics that don't mean anything to a foraging herbivore, like percent cover or plant volume or frequencies. We see a lack of understanding of what causes variation in forage abundance and forage quality, such that often sampling designs are inadequate to meet objectives. We also see conclusions that show a lack of understanding of how to not only collect data, but also interpret it in a way that's relevant to the animal and its requirements. And so addressing some of these issues was the foundation of our skills workshop. As Kristen said, we had within just the workshop committee and with additional instructors, we had a huge diversity in terms of experience and interest. Some of these folks have had decades of experience working in the nutritional ecology field. So I think that we came to the workshop with a great group of instructors. And I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the attendees, the timelines, that sort of thing. You know, when we originally talked about having the skills workshop, we wanted to advertise about a year in advance. And we wanted to open the registration up about 6 months, at least 6 months in advance, so folks could get the times on their calendars, could get the costs into their budget. And we did fairly well with the advertisement. The first advertisement was October 2020. But we weren't able to open our registration until late May 2021. And I think it's no surprise as to why that was. With the COVID uncertainty, we weren't sure if we could hold a workshop at all. We weren't sure what level of restriction we would have to put in place and whether that would make it logistically not feasible to even have the workshop. And so we weren't able to open registration until fairly late relative to the timing of the workshop. And I think that may have impacted folks' availability. So we put on this workshop in August 17th through 19th, those 2.5 days. Critical to this workshop is that we have to have it associated with the laboratory that runs these nutritional assays. So this year we had it at Pullman, Washington, which seemed like an obvious choice with the WSU Habitat Analysis Lab. And then we charged $400 for this 2.5-day workshop. I'm going to come back to this, but we did open the workshop for 24 attendees, which in reality would have been too much. 19 registered and then 16 attended. The 3 that did not attend that registered, at least 2 of those, it was due to logistical and or travel concerns related to COVID, which is understandable. So pretty pleased though that we had 16 folks in the workshop. They were split pretty evenly between graduate students and agency biologists / habitat specialists, which was also good to see. We were glad that we had that diversity. And then sort of as expected, because we had the workshop in Pullman, Washington, the majority of attendees were from the Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. We did have a couple students from Utah and an agency biologist from Pennsylvania. So that was good to expand the geographic attendance a little bit. The 2 yellow stars are the 2 folks that due to sort of COVID logistic reasons could not come, but we still had at least a registration of somebody from Wisconsin and Texas. So not quite as, you know, geographically diverse as we would have wanted, but maybe better than expected. And I did want to remind myself to say that we were able to secure 15 continuing education credits in category 1 of the Certified Wildlife Biologist Renewal Professional Development Certificate Program. And so I think we'll be able to do that moving forward with additional workshops, but I'm not sure how many folks are in that program and took advantage of it, but at least we were able to do that. So our workshop had 5 different components. Lectures taught via mostly in person, but Claire MacArthur from University of Sydney in Australia did do a Zoom web or Zoom lecture. We had hands-on in the lab and in the field. We had problem-solving sessions, which I'm going to define a bit more in a few slides. Case studies from the instructors, and then what I call educational, but hopefully fun, that were optional, but something sort of tacked on it to the end of each day if folks wanted to participate. I'm just going to kind of go through these in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. So we had a number of lectures. Generally, we did lectures in the morning before lunch so that folks wouldn't have the after lunch sleepies. We started fairly basic. This is a list of all the lectures and it's also in the order that we gave them. So we started fairly basic with an introduction to nutrition and digestive tracts, animal requirements, moved on to structure and chemistry of plants, measuring plant nutritional quality, plant secondary metabolites, vitamins and minerals. This was all the first day. The second day, we went more towards abundance and sampling. Had lectures on measuring plant abundance, converting plant cover to biomass, sampling strategy, relevancy to animals, and interpretation of results. And then on the last day, we sort of brought it all together in more of a broad scale application with developing foodscapes and using the fresh deer model to integrate forage quality and quantity relative to animal requirements. And also you can use that to estimate nutritional carrying capacity. In the lab, did a number of different sort of lectures and hands-on. I'm going to get back to that in a bit, but sample preparation, we talked about how to do oven dry matter and what the importance of reporting on a dry matter basis is. Sequential fiber assays, which is digestible energy, bombs, which is gross energy, crude protein, tannins, fats, in vitro dry matter digestibility / digestible protein, and total detergent fiber. So there are quite a number of lab assays that we went over in the laboratory sessions. In the field sessions, we had 2 different ones, one for forage quality and one for forage quantity. In the forage quality one, we talked about sample collection and storage, which is critically important. Sources of variation, how to clip relative to an animal. And then something that I think is not thought about very much is capturing variation of a species or group of species, not only across samples, but within a single sample. For forage quantity, we estimated plant cover, and we talked and did exercises about the effect of plant plot size and observer bias. We did biomass sampling by clipping, and we compared the two of the estimating plant cover and sampling relative to time, relative to error and observer bias. We talked about estimating abundance of fruits and berries amassed, and again, even with quantity, the sources of variation and the relevancy to the animal. And we had some discussion on plot size and number and things like cost versus time versus reducing variance. So the problem solving session, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time describing that. I think as a profession, we assume that when we send samples to a lab and we get data back, it's just correct, it's relevant, it's what it represents the species that we sent in. And that's sometimes not a good assumption to have. So one of the things that we really wanted to do with this workshop was to, through the course of lectures and the lab sections, is talk about things that can happen to data sets. From a lab perspective, there are some assays that are fully automated, so you may not expect to see some issues. There are other lab assays that are can have more human error in it because it's not fully automated. You have to enter data on a variety of steps. Other lab assays, again, as I mentioned before, they can be used for different applications. And so, for example, fiber assays for wildlife students, for wildlifers are different than for folks using them for agriculture. If you don't know that, then your results may not match what they should be. From a field perspective, you can get contaminants in your sample that can greatly influence your lab results. You can get technicians that, put the wrong sample in the wrong bag if you're not paying attention. You can get labeling issues. There's all sorts of things that can cause a problem with your data set. And so what we did was we separated the group into smaller groups, and we had 10 real data, and I underline that, real data scenarios of problematic data. These are things that I've seen in our data sets. I've seen when students have given me data sets to look over, things that other professors have seen in their graduate students or other students. And so we asked the attendees to look through, and based on what they learned in 2.5 days, see if they could figure out what was wrong with the data sets. I have to say I was really impressed with the amount that they got, but this is a really challenging thing to learn in 2.5 days. And so we went through the answer keys, they got the data sets and the answer keys, but the primary thing was we wanted the attendees to think critically, start thinking critically about their data and just not accept that it's right. When you get it, take it and explore it, graph it, try to think about it relative to animal requirements. Does it make sense? Instead of just grabbing it, popping it in a model and not really thinking about what it means. One of the last things we sort of added to the agenda was case studies, and I think this ended up being a fairly important addition. And so several of the instructors were able to present some specific examples of, okay, we've got an objective and we know all these ways to measure forage quality and quantity. How do we build all that together with a study designed to meet the objectives? And so we talked about a few of those at the end of the session. And then the educational but fun, because we were at WSU, we had the pleasure of being able to go to Lisa Shipley's deer pens and then Charlie Robbins' bear pens. We talked about digestion crates of the deer pens, and then we went in with the deer and we talked about the importance of, fine scale foraging data from team animals. And then we went across the street, and Charlie, of course, is full of information in terms of nutrition, and he gave some examples of some of the nutrition work that he's been doing with bears. And then we got to see a cool training exercise where they give the bear some honey and they pop their leg out to get a blood sample without drugging. So I think these are optional. Everybody attended, but they were pretty fun to kind of end the day. So this was the first workshop that most of the instructors had put on. This certainly was outside of my comfort zone. And so we did ask the attendees to provide us with an evaluation, because we knew that there were certainly things we could improve on for the next time. And they did a pretty good job with giving us very useful information. So I've got to thank all the attendees for that. We asked them, at first we asked them just 3 fairly general ranking questions, performance of instructors, 4 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. Luckily they gave us all 4. The quality of the course, again, 4 being the highest, 13 folks gave us a 4, 3 gave us a 3. The 3 that gave us a 3 were not all students or all agency biologists. There was a mix, which was interesting. Was the amount of material covered appropriate? 3 said too much, 3 said not enough. The rest, about 10, said about right. So I think we probably hit that fairly good. And again, no trends between students and biologists of who said too much or not enough. So that was interesting. We got a lot of really positive feedback, which was good to see. And I'm not going to share a lot of that, but there were some specific comments that I think I wanted to share, and because I think it showed that at least to some level, we did achieve what we set out to do. So just a few of those. Appreciated discussions on budget and efficiency, because the practicality of project design are often overlooked in workshops. Appreciated how much you brought this research back to animal requirements. From the biologist from Pennsylvania said, some of my superiors were concerned this was a Western course, and never felt that way because it remained focused on the techniques and methods used to examine nutritional ecology and would be helpful for wildlife managers from all North American geographies. I think this is spot on, gleaned a solid foundation of the basics and have a sense of where to go for more information. I feel more confident in my ability to conduct nutritional work and would highly recommend this workshop. So this was good for us to see. I think it did mean that we succeeded in at least some of the foundation ideas that we wanted to get across. But we also had some very good suggestions for improvement. And so I wanted to go through a few of those and talk about how we may change the workshop relative to these suggestions. one of the most common suggestion was that there was too much lab detail for assays that I would never do on my own. And this is a very fair statement because oftentimes there are certain graduate students that may do some lab assays, but generally speaking, you're collecting samples and sending them to a lab. So why do I need to know all that detail? Some people said there was too little detail, but by far the majority said too much lab detail. The committee has talked about ways to address this in the next workshop. Some of the ideas are because, you know, some of these lab assays, some take days, some take weeks. There's not a lot of space, so trying to do some hands-on stuff is very challenging. And so one idea is maybe take some of that and pull it into a lecture instead of, you know, standing in the lab, just looking at, you know, machines and beakers and stuff. We did the way we did to break up the classroom sessions, but that may be an idea. We talked about adding on a sort of extra component so that maybe it's a paid more or whatever, but if you wanted more details about the lab assays, you would do this extra lab component. And a few other things, but I did want to say that this is an interesting critique of the workshop, I think, and it is fair, but it also, I think it means that we didn't do one thing that we set out to do, and that is, as I talked about with the problem solving sessions, the more you understand about the lab assays that you're asking for when you send in samples, the better the more information you have to judge if what the results you're getting back from the lab, if they're correct, if they may have error involved with them, etc. And so I think it's important for folks to understand these assays, even if they don't do them. And I think what we may have missed on is we need to do a better integration of the problem solving with the actual lab assay lectures. So that was one thing that we talked in detail about. The case studies were a hit. There was a suggestion that we talk more about the methodology decisions, less data, and then maybe scatter them throughout rather than just put them on the last day. And one of the reasons that we did this is because it's kind of a cart before the horse. And so, you know, if you have a case study that incorporates all the different elements and you do that on the first day, then you're getting to information that the students haven't yet got to. But we did talk about, there were several different options for case studies that we could put on day 1 or day 2. And so I think that we'll be trying to do this. More field sampling, particularly with sampling forage quality. And so the forage quality section was really more of a lecture outside. We didn't actually clip forage quality samples. And I think the reason for that was a naivety on at least my part. I kind of assumed that where the lacking of information would not be the actual collection, but more of the how do you capture the variance, how do you make it relevant to the animal, those kind of things. And so we didn't really plan on doing a lot of hands-on, and I think that we know now that we need to get the hands-on element into even the forage quality side of things. In terms of forage quantity, I think most people were pleased, but I still think we could do even more with that hands-on now that we know sort of the level of experience of at least this first set of attendees. Lab time to run the fresh deer model, foodscape modelings, etc. So we did have lectures on both of those, but we didn't actually have the attendees run the fresh deer model with a set of data. And I think that that was a missed opportunity. And I think that this is a really good suggestion. And so one of the things that we have talked about is the whole group was split in two when we went to the lab and field. So one group would go to the lab first, the other would go to the field, and then we'd swap them. One of the things we talked about was switching it up to 3 groups. One group is in the lab, one's in the field, and one's doing sort of a modeling or simulation session. And again, we may still have a cart before the horse situation with that relative to logistics and timing, but I think that there's a way that we could figure that out. And I think that was a very good suggestion. Along the same lines, there was several folks that suggested having a sort of a group problem solving session where we give each group a different objective and the attendees work on developing a sampling strategy. And I think that, again, that could be brought into the sort of modeling group as well. So I think that was also a very good suggestion. Not necessarily a suggestion from the attendees, but from my personal perspective, we I don't think we gave enough time. There were some lectures that went over. We didn't really schedule time for questions. We also had transportation where we had to, put folks in vans and get them to the lab and to the field and to the classroom. And some of that was kind of a little bit more challenging than we expected. And so we were a bit rushed at the end. And so I think changing this to a 3-day workshop, a full 3-day workshop, retaining the same material, but just adding in some of that buffer may be good. And as I mentioned, particularly for the lab, I think we've decided that we have to have a max capacity of 18 participants. Even if we do 3 groups, that's 6 per group. And I think that's sort of the max of how we can handle the efficiency of the lab setting. So all incredibly great suggestions. I'm really grateful for the attendees for taking the time to do this and provide their input. So what's next? I don't know about my other instructors, but I was pretty exhausted at the end of this. And so when we talked about the next workshop, I was kind of wondering if there's any way we would be able to do it yearly. And I think we decided that for right now, we would see about doing this workshop every 2 years, not only because of time constraints of instructors, but we don't know if we'd get the attendance if we did it on an annual basis. So thinking about every 2 years, again, we have to sort of put this with a lab as opposed to, an annual meeting or a regional meeting. This has to be in a setting where we have access to a nutritional lab. And so Pullman was one of the most obvious choices for this first workshop. We also would have that availability in Texas and Alaska. And in terms of the region, we don't know of any nutritional lab in the east or northeast that we could maybe pair up with. But if anybody knows of one or has any suggestions, definitely reach out to myself or the Nutritional Working Group and let us know. And it's kind of a no-brainer. As instructors, we definitely looked at Alaska as being the next. So in 2023, our goal is possibly to have this in Alaska. Midsummer would be the best time. And then in 2025, shifting it to Texas midwinter. After that, who knows if we find an eastern place, maybe in the east, or otherwise returning back to Pullman. So far, that's the plan for the next few workshops. So one of the secondary goals of this skills workshop was to sort of bring in a profit for the working group so that we can do some other goals like provide some student scholarships, etc. And so we do want to thank the contributors who paid for some of the costs of not only time for instructors and travel, but NCASI paid for food, and Ancom Technology paid for some lab supplies. So we definitely want to make sure that we thank everybody who contributed or sponsored this workshop. And with that, if you have any questions about the past workshop or future workshops, or if you want to be put on a list to receive notification when we make the final decisions on the next workshop, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to me. And this is my contact email. But for now, if you have any questions just on our past workshop, please let me know.
So Rachel, I'm not sure if you're seeing the chat, but it sounds like a lot of folks here are interested in the next workshop, and that there's consideration coming to Alaska, and are noting that there's a July 2023 International Mammalogical Congress, which will be in Anchorage, and asking where the nutrition lab is. And Katie's got the answer in there that the nutrition lab in Alaska is in Palmer.
I just got to ask a question. Any interest in coming to British Columbia to do a workshop? Certainly. If we can, again, we have to sort of align it with a lab. Of course, we also have, I assume at some point, COVID restrictions not going to be a problem, but yeah, I think that I know that there is interest in Canada for a workshop like this. So definitely, if you know of a lab, then reach out to me and we can discuss. The question was asked, are there any handouts, video recordings from this workshop that could be provided to non-attendees? Not at this time. I mean, part of the cost of the workshop was access to those kind of materials, but we are trying to develop materials, online resources for the Nutritional Ecology Working Group that may not be the exact same, but that would provide some more information on lab assays and where to send things, and some more like tools for certain other techniques. And so I think for right now, the answer to that is no, but we're trying to work on sort of a finding a way to bring some of this in that's more accessible to more folks. That makes sense.
And Rachel, kind of related to that, the recent chapter that you and a couple of the other instructors published, is that a good resource or kind of an introduction to some of these things for the workshop?
Yeah, then Kristen's referring to the last wildlife techniques manual, and Lisa Shipley and Dave Hewitt and I wrote a chapter on nutritional ecology techniques. And while it certainly doesn't go into as much detail as we went into in the workshop, it does talk about, why is nutrition important, digestive tracts, different lab assays, why we use them, plant structure and chemistry, and those sorts of things. So I think that that's actually a very good starting place for looking at pros and cons of techniques and getting some of that background information. Thanks, Kristen.
I guess while we're waiting to see if there are any last questions from folks, I'll just do another plug for the Nutritional Ecology Working Group. We're always excited to have new members, and we are having elections soon. If you're looking for a way to get more involved with TWS or to learn a little bit more about the working group, please contact us, and we can answer any questions you have and hopefully recruit you and maybe talk you into serving on the board.
Trisha, you're muted.
Great, thanks. Well, Kristen and Rachel, thank you very much for giving these presentations today on behalf of the Nutritional Ecology Working Group. As you all probably know, next month is a big month for the Wildlife Society. We have our virtual conference from November 1st to the 5th. And then at the end of November, we're going to be hosting another webinar sponsored by the Renewable Energy Working Group. And information for that will be on the website in the coming days.